Okay, so I'm back showing round three of my tournament from the 2019 Bay Area International. First two games, I won my first one and lost my second one. In round three, I was paired against international master Raymond Kaufman, who is about, I think, rated 2250 or so, but is quite a strong player. In fact, last time we played, I played white and I lost to him quite handedly. So I was definitely expecting a very serious fight in this game, but feeling optimistic and hoping to win. I started with knight f3. He played knight f6, c4. This isn't my usual repertoire. I'm more of a d4 player, but I wanted to experiment with this setup a little bit and see what kind of position I could create. So we ended up going for this line with knight c3, knight c6. I played e3. This is one of the main ways white is kind of fighting for an advantage here, somewhat surprisingly, but just trying to play d4 and reach some good position that would typically arise from a d4 opening. But here he went for g6, which is definitely a very playable line. I pushed d4, takes, d5, and takes, queen b3. So this is a pretty theoretical line, but to be honest, I didn't really know a whole lot about this position, so I was kind of winging it here. I remembered that one of the main lines is that if black plays knight takes c3, white doesn't just recapture right away, but throws in this move bishop c4, hitting f7, and then black could play just like e6 here, b takes c3, and then this is kind of playable. Black also has this funny move to play knight d5 back, giving back the knight but not letting white take on c3 here. And then black plays e6, and white usually takes on c6 and tries to play against this weak c-pawn. I think the results here have been pretty good for white, so I would have been quite comfortable going into this. I think the main line is queen d5, bishop e3. Then white brings the f rook to c1 and puts some pressure on black in the position. But instead, after queen b3, black just played e6 here, which I knew was a move. I just didn't know very much about this move and how white is supposed to fight for an advantage here. But looking at some of the games afterwards and analyzing these positions a little bit, it's clear that this is just a really solid line for black, and it's hard for white to pose too many problems here. Well, I played bishop b5. This seemed pretty logical. Bishop g7, and then bishop g5. So I'm completely on my own here. I really didn't know the theory during the game. Castles turns out to be the main move. Black typically castles. And I guess the best way for white is to just take on c6 here and play something like knight a4 and kind of play in this style again, where we've given up the bishop pair, but we've gotten this c5 square for our knight, and we have just easy play against this c6 pawn. In many cases, white wants to just jump with the knight on e5, and bishop can come to d2, rooks come to c1, and so on. So if I had this position again, I would probably go for something like this during the game. Okay, I chose bishop g5, kind of feeling that he was well prepared here, so I wanted to see if I could get him out of book and just reach a fresh position. So bishop g5, he played queen b6, and I went for knight a4. Apparently there are some games here with queen a3, which seems like the most challenging way for white to play the position, preventing black from castling. And black doesn't have anything better than f6, because white is actually threatening, I'm not sure in what order, but let's say knight takes d5, ed5, and then queen e7 is mate. You don't even have to take the knight on c6. So f6 is kind of forced. White takes on d5, takes on c6, and then just castles. Apparently it's a very sharp line. Taking on g5 is way too dangerous. White just plays rook e1, and queen comes into e7 with devastating effect. So black plays king f7, and according to the theory, black is fine here, but it does feel like a pretty dynamic position. White could certainly try to pose problems here, as black hasn't quite equalized yet and will need to, keep developing his pieces. Okay, in any case, I decided on the move knight a4. Just wanted to gain this tempo on the queen, and I knew in the future I might want to take on c6 and bring my knight to c5, where probably going to be a good square. He threw in a check on a5, bishop d2, queen c7, castles, rook c1, bishop d7, and knight c5. So here I felt like my position was quite reasonable. I thought, like, if nothing else, I can I'm threatening to take and then take on c6 and double his, or not double, but weaken his structure, and then play against the c6 pawn, move like queen a4, followed up by doubling the rooks on the c file. But then he played rook ac8, and well, now it's like, okay, if white takes on d7, it's hard to imagine white can really fight for anything here. In fact, I do have to be careful because eventually I'm going to end up with an isolated pawn on d4, and black just seemingly has an extremely healthy structure. So I figured allowing a lot of trades like this is not only unambitious, but I mean, white could easily end up worse here. Even rook c1, just queen goes back, and there's not much for white. So yeah, I was definitely wanting to keep some activity in the position. I really didn't know what to do. I finally decided on this move, rook fe1. It seemed like pretty natural. I'm getting my last piece into the game, and I'm also opening up the f1 square for my bishop, which I thought might be useful. In hindsight, probably rook fd1 is a better move, just to lend more support to the d pawn, and I think this would be more solid for white. In the game after rook fe1, black played a6. And here I just made a huge mistake with bishop f1. I mean, I was kind of following my plan from before, but I simply miscalculated and misjudged things. Objectively, I definitely should have just taken on c6 here. Then after bishop takes c6, knight e5, I think white is not really worse here. I'm threatening to, for example, take on a6, so black does have to be a little bit careful here. But probably white is not really fighting for an advantage, and I think black should be able to remain solid here. Okay, it would have been an equal game, and who knows what would have happened from there. After bishop f1, first I thought the position looks quite nice, and I'm threatening to take on b7, and if I win this pawn, then the a6 pawn will follow as well. But then black really surprised me with this move, knight takes d4. And I didn't just miss the move outright. I knew it was possible. I just felt like it wasn't working, based on black kind of opening himself up to this potential discovered attack on the c-file. But Kaufman, I mean, he did the right thing here. He kind of like calculated the lines, saw that the move is possible and working, and then just went for it, and totally punished me with this one. Okay, so black has a couple of nice points here. After knight takes d4, which is kind of forced, I can't do anything immediately because my own queen on b3 is hanging, and then once black takes on b3, he's also going to be hitting the bishop, and so on. So knight takes d4, bishop takes d4 was forced, and now white has a choice. Initially, I thought knight takes e6 would be simply good for white. I mean, I'm hitting the queen, I'm taking a pawn, I'm hitting his rook, and I'm hitting his knight. Then I realized his idea was to sacrifice the queen. I'm not sure if he wanted to take on f2 first or take on e6, but black has some options here. I mean, it's a pretty sharp position. I thought his idea was to take on f2, then if king takes f2, he takes my knight on e6 with check. He opens up the rook, king g1, and then his queen can move, and I wasn't sure about this position. Black is a pawn up, but white has some compensation, mainly because the dark squared bishop is so strong. I think black should probably play queen b6 check and just go for the endgame. And yeah, I think white has compensation here, but maybe not more than that. But after knight takes e6, it's actually a lot stronger for black to simply just immediately recapture the knight. And if I take on c7, he has this trick with bishop takes f2 check, king h1, and bishop takes e1. And my bishop on f1 ends up hanging with mate. I have no time to play any moves like rook takes d7 or bishop takes e1. So if my pawn was on h3 here and this wasn't a mating threat, I think white would still be okay here because I can take on d7 and grab a lot of material. Or maybe take on e1 is more accurate, but f1 is hanging and that's a checkmate, so this is basically just losing for white. Sorry, a lot of arrows here. The only thing I can try is rook takes c8 because I'm pinning him. He takes with the bishop. Bishop comes out to avoid the mate. Bishop takes d2. And then we end up in a situation where black has rook and bishop and knight for the queen. White has some play, but really not anywhere near enough because this bishop can just easily jump back to g7 and black will just be in full control and should win the game. Bishop takes d5, I should point out, not possible because rook f1 is mate. So over the board, I kind of realized that some of these queen sacks are quite strong. I'm not sure exactly what turned me off to this line because I felt like black might also consider playing bishop takes e6, and that didn't look clear at all either. But yeah, eventually I realized, okay, knight takes e6 is not working. Black has, I think, a number of interesting options there. Then I looked for other options. I mean, knight takes d7 is not possible, just queen takes and black is up a pawn. I thought a little bit about knight takes a6. This move also looks somewhat tempting, but then I felt like, well, the knight here is just going to be hanging. I'm not sure what move black plays, maybe just simple queen d6. Queen b6 is also possible. I felt like white was getting worse here, but maybe I should have gone for this compared to what happened in the game. But yeah, something like queen b6, and if I trade queens, the knight will have to come back, and it feels quite awkward for white, and white is probably just getting a worse position already, maybe even much worse. In any case, I finally decided to take on b7. To me, this seemed like kind of the safest. Queen b8. And during the game, I just didn't realize how much trouble I was in here, but it turns out that queen a7 is a huge threat, and the f2 pawn is difficult to defend, not to mention my knight on b7 is hard to rescue. I think probably I should have just played knight a5 here in order to get out. Then I doubt black, I mean, he could take on b3 and take on b2, but I think he likely would have gone for queen a7, just putting more pressure on the f2 pawn. Then I have to do something like maybe queen f3, and okay, definitely this is better than what happened in the game, but yeah, black is already just seizing the initiative here easily. I mean, he has a lot of moves to choose from. He can even take on b2 if he wants, or play maybe rook b8 also possible. But yeah, a lot of ideas, and white's position just doesn't look very, very fun to play. This knight on d5 is just, it's not attacking anything, but it's in the center and it's on a secure outpost, so it's really controlling a lot of important squares. Well, after queen b8, yeah, again, I should have tried to bail out with knight a5. I ended up going for bishop h6. I just thought this was a nice active move. I can at least get a tempo and see where his rook is going. Then if he puts the rook on e8, then whenever his queen goes to a7, he always has to watch out for knight d6. But then he, took some time here and he found a strong move, queen a7. And he's just giving up the rook on f8, but he knows that eventually he's going to be able to take on f2 and win back his material anyway. So after this move, I spent a lot of time here, but white is in big trouble. Okay, I took on f8 because I figured, well, if he takes on f2, then I think white is doing okay here after king h1. If bishop takes e1, I have this move bishop c5, which is a nice resource, and I think white is going to be on top here after rook takes e1. But he did the right thing. After bishop takes f8, he just calmly recaptures with the rook. Now the f2 pawn is hanging. I can defend that, but he has a second threat in the position, and that's to just play rook to b8 and win my knight on b7. So here's where I probably spent my longest think of the game, trying to decide whether to just give back the exchange and a move like knight d6, or defend the f2 pawn but allow rook to b8 and play a position where I have rook versus two pieces. So I really tried to make this work for a while. After rook to b8, I considered bishop takes a6, actually similar to my previous game against Grandmaster Swerts. And the idea here is that if black takes on a6, I have knight to c5. So a lot of stuff is hanging, but black can take the queen. I take on a6, black probably takes on b2, rook takes b2, bishop takes b2. And then I was trying to figure out this endgame. I felt like black is for sure better with two bishops versus the rook, but white should have some chances with the passed a pawn and the fact that the position has been simplified. Black doesn't have a rook anymore, so it's hard for black to, let's say, create any chances against my king. But I really wasn't sure, and it felt like a very uncomfortable endgame to play, and one that I would probably end up losing anyway. Afterwards, I checked with the engine. Stockfish gives like minus 2.5 or something, which is a pretty serious evaluation. I feel like in a practical game, maybe white has more chances than that. I don't think the game is just over, especially with the knight. I can always hope for some tricks. But yeah, it kind of tells the story that most likely black can really push this one to victory if they can play accurately. I mean, it's a matter of like bringing in the king, making sure the two bishops and the knight are well coordinated, keeping white's pawn at bay, and then eventually pushing on the king side. So it would be a very long struggle from here. In hindsight, maybe I should have gone for this one because I don't think it's such an easy conversion. But yeah, that's basically what I was considering. Eventually, I decided not to go for that endgame. I mainly just didn't want to suffer there. And I played the move knight to d6, hoping maybe just to keep more intrigue in the position. But yeah, objectively, I knew I was going to be in big trouble here. So bishop takes f2 was played, king h1, bishop takes e1, rook takes e1. After all that, black has emerged with the extra pawn, but he also has the initiative, and his pieces are frankly better because knight on d5 is really strong, bishop can come to c6, and he starts with the right move here, just activating the queen with queen f2 and just gaining this really important tempo. Now it's annoying for white because rook d1 runs into knight to e3, I think. Looked very annoying during the game, just hitting everything. And rook c1 runs into the nice move queen f4. And white has no way of defending the knight and rook in one move. So I considered rook a1 for a moment just to get the rook completely out of the way, but I decided on rook b1. Then black plays bishop c6. I don't think this was his only move, but definitely it's a very logical move just to immediately put the bishop on this diagonal and threaten all kinds of knight f4 and knight e3 ideas. So I tried queen c4, bishop a8, and yeah, I think he just played this part of the game quite well. I really didn't get any chances whatsoever. Of course, I thought about taking the pawn here, but I think black will play something like knight e3 or knight f4, and then if I play knight b7, I think he can just play rook to b8, and the knight can't move because there'll be a checkmate on g2, and yeah, it just looks pretty hopeless for white. Actually, black can also just take on f1 here. Rook takes f1 and queen takes, and white's position is kind of collapsing. So after bishop a8, I try to just keep everything under control. I think usually when you're defending, this is the right thing to do. Just bring in more pieces into the game and just try to control as many squares as possible. Queen f4, I play knight c3. So now I figure, okay, if we go for a queen trade, probably black should be winning this endgame, but things are definitely simplifying. Actually, I think he definitely could have gone for this line, and he has this trick here with rook c8. Point being, after I take on a6, he can take on c3, and then I can't give rook b8 check and take the bishop because rook c1 at the end is going to be checkmate. So white has to spend some time defending the back rank, but this gives black enough time to consolidate his advantage, and I think black should be winning this one. It might take, like 30 more moves, but I think eventually the passed e-pawn and the pawn chain with like f5, e4, and the king coming in is going to be decisive, and yeah, white's pieces are just too passive here. But okay, he decided to keep the queens on the board. I think that's pretty understandable, as well as my king is pretty weak. I play knight e4 again. He puts the queen on e3. Now I just have no good active move, so I decided to just play a3, just kind of pass the move, calmly improve my position, and see what he comes up with. I simply just couldn't find another move here for white, as black has a lot of threats in the position with knight f4 always in the air. Well, he played knight f4, and my idea was to, okay, give this check, king g7, knight g4. He keeps the queen active with queen d2, and because he's starting bishop takes g2, I think I'm basically forced to go for the endgame with queen c3, so that's what I decided to do. He took and played rook c8, and this whole time black has only been a pawn up, but he's had an extra pawn and the better pieces. Like his rook, bishop, and knight are still way more active than mine, and my structure is also weaker, so I never really had any hopes of saving this one. I kind of felt like it was just lost for quite some time. But okay, I kept trying with c4. Then he switched over to rook d8, which I think was a good decision, getting ready to play rook d2 and going after the g-pawn. I tried rook c1 here, rook d2, and I pushed c5. Might as well get some counterplay and try to create something, hope he messes up, but he was accurate until the end, unfortunately. Knight takes g2. So bishop takes g2, rook g2 is pretty hopeless. I mean, I can try to use my c-pawn, but he can simply take the knight, and I can't even push my pawn forward. So after knight takes g2, I played c6 immediately, and this was a moment where black really could have gone wrong here. If you guys would like, this would be actually a good opportunity to pause the video and try to figure out black's best move. Black has, I think, only one move that actually wins here, or at least wins cleanly. So it would be a good chance to try and find that. Okay, so I was really hoping for knight f4, which seems very logical, but after the move king to g1, suddenly the pawn is not pinned, and I'm ready to push c7 and force black to give up the bishop with bishop b7. And so here actually white I think is okay, because eventually black is just going to have to give up a whole piece. He can try h5, I'll push c7, bishop b7, and then I just move my knight, and c8 queen is coming next, and I'm winning a piece. I don't think white will have actually any winning chances after that, because black will have 3 very healthy pawns for it and super active rook, but okay, at least I would most likely save the game. But knight f4, king g1 did not happen. Instead, he found a much stronger move, knight h4. So same idea of opening up the bishop to pin the pawn to my king on h1, but the knight on h4 is actually a lot stronger in that it can come to f3, and then eventually black wants to deliver rook h2 mate. My knight is currently on g4, but black will play h5 to dislodge the knight. And so white here is basically just busted. If I play king g1, of course he just gives check. I have to come back. Then he'll play h5. I can push c7 if I want to lose in the prettiest way possible. He'll just take the knight and give checkmate next move. Maybe he can even mate me with some nice discover check as well. So that doesn't work for white. I don't really have any other ideas. Yeah, I thought about like bishop g2, some tricks like this, but this stuff rarely works. Let's say rook takes g2 or knight takes g2 are both fine. c7, and then if black wants to, you can even just play bishop b7 and just give the piece back and have 3 extra pawns. But I'm sure black has some kind of forced mate as well with, yeah, knight h4 and bishop g2 coming, or knight f4 and knight h3, bishop g2. Yeah, just so many moves here. So there was not a lot of hope here for white. I tried the move knight to e5, just covering the f3 square. If I did nothing, then okay, h5 is coming, and then knight will be coming to f3. So knight e5. He played f6, and I decided to resign here because I'm simply just out of moves. Anywhere my knight goes, he's just going to come in with either knight f3 or h5, and then knight f3. Knight d7 just runs into rook takes d7. And I think the only chance, maybe knight d3, but then he plays knight f3, hitting mate on h2. I have to play bishop g2, rook takes d3, c7, and then he just goes bishop b7. And he's in total control. I have no way of promoting the pawn and keeping the queen, so he's just going to give back the piece and then again leave himself with 3 extra pawns. So yeah, that was definitely a very tough game, especially, you know, with white losing to like quote-unquote lower rated players is kind of tough. But well played game from black's point of view. I mean, he seems like he just found all the right ideas and then was able to convert nicely. So kudos to him. I definitely have to study this opening a little bit more carefully if I want to go back here, because I really need to know what I'm doing here and avoid getting worse with white a second time. But okay, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you want to see like more standings or games from the tournament, there are always links in the description below. Until next time, take care.